Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. Today, we are on Chapter 6 of Blemished Beauty. Here we go. Chapter 6, Helpless. Daphne woke with a start. She could have sworn she heard the sound of breaking glass. Looking around the dark room, she saw nothing. She rested her eyes on the red glowing numbers of the alarm clock next to her. 2:30 a.m. Suddenly, the angry wind bellowed so loudly she could have sworn it had come inside. Daphne sat up straight, her heart accelerating to double its normal tempo. What was that? She heard a loud slam, followed by footsteps thumping hard on the floor down the hallway. Someone was here. Daphne hopped out of bed and crawled to the bedroom door, opening it just a crack. The light was on in the front room, and snow was scattered all over the floor. A harsh coughing and wheezing reached her ears. A stranger was here. Even if I called the police, they probably wouldn't be able to get out here. Daphne limped down the hallway and into the well-lit room. Lying on his side and facing the fire was a man bundled in a large coat and hat. Every last inch of him was covered with snow. "Excuse me," Daphne called to him, trying to sound stern. "You can't barge into someone else's place like this." The man tried to speak, but coughed instead. Daphne crossed her arms, waiting for him to finish. He tried again. "You can when it's your own place, Daphne." Daphne was so shocked at the sound of her name, she stepped back. "What? Is that you, Tom?" Tom just coughed in response. Daphne hobbled around him to see his face. He still had his snowy face mask on, but she did recognize his brown eyes. "How did you get inside? The snow is almost 5 feet deep," Daphne exclaimed. Tom pointed upward with his finger. "I broke a window in the attic," he grumbled. "Oh, that's clever." "Well, you're going to be sick, Tom," she accused. "Why did you do this to yourself?" Tom folded his hands under his head. "Later, Daphne," he said, closing his eyes. "Wait, Tom, don't go to sleep in those wet clothes. You probably already have hypothermia. You don't need pneumonia, too." "Can't move," Tom mumbled. Daphne stared at him for a moment. This was her just a week ago. She knew exactly how he felt. Except Tom looked worse. Daphne knelt beside him, slipping the large fur hat off his head. "You looked soaked to the bone, Tom. We've got to get you warm." She pulled and tugged at his clothes. It was exhausting. Tom's clothes were soaking wet, and his limp body was no help. Finally, Daphne got him down to his boxer shorts and helped the shivering man stumble, along with herself, to the bathtub. Daphne turned the hot water on, letting it run until she found the perfect temperature, and then plugged up the drain. "There you go," she told him. "I washed the towels today, so they are nice and fresh. I'll bring you some dry clothes in a minute. Get warm and call me if you need anything else." Tom was hugging himself and shivering violently. "Thank you, Daphne." "Of course," she said with a smile, and left the room. As Daphne set Tom's dry clothes on the counter of the vanity, she heard the wind howl again. Now she understood it was coming from the broken window in the attic. What was she supposed to do about that? Tom must have been thinking the same thing because he suddenly spoke up to her in a raspy voice from behind the bathtub's curtain. "In the attic, Daphne, you will find a square board that is larger than the window. Will you cover the window with it and just hammer it to the wall? That way the wind won't ruin everything up there. I'll install a new window when I can." "Sure. Will I find a hammer and nails in the attic?" "Yes. Thank you, Daphne." "Of course," she said as she closed the bathroom door behind her and scurried into the mudroom. There she discovered a rope hanging from the ceiling attached to a metal ring. She yanked on it, and a hatch opened with an attached retractable ladder. She climbed up the ladder as the temperature around her rapidly grew colder. "Whoa!" she cried out loud when she reached the attic. A lot of half-made furniture was up here. No wonder Tom wanted it protected. Every piece was already dusted with snow. Daphne spotted the square door Tom had told her about and rushed to it. She saw there were already holes in the wall above the window. How many times had Tom done this? At any rate, she had a lot of work to do to clean this place up. Once Daphne was finally back in bed, her alarm clock told her it was 4 a.m. The moment she closed her eyes, she heard some fumbling in the bathroom. Tom was finished. Quickly, she hopped out of bed and staggered to the kitchen where she heated up some cornbread she had baked herself for dinner the prior evening. Then she warmed up some hot cocoa and set it next to the bread. When the bathroom door opened, she stepped out into the hallway to find Tom walking toward his bedroom, holding onto the walls on his way. Daphne quickened her uneven step and put his arm in hers and led him to the kitchen. "Have an early morning snack," she suggested. "Your body needs it." Without a word, Tom complied and sat down on a bar stool and ate and drank. Daphne didn't like that he was still coughing through it all. "Thank you, Daphne," he said when he had finished. "No problem." "Good night," he muttered while getting to his feet. Good morning. I'm going to bed." Daphne smiled. "Have a good sleep." Tom slept almost the entire 3 days afterward. Daphne tried to get him to eat, toast, crackers, anything, but he would shake his head, cough a lot, and go back to sleep. She did, however, successfully get him to drink a few sips of water with assistance. Other than occasionally getting up to use the bathroom, he stayed in bed and slept and coughed. Daphne checked on him often to refill the humidifier or bring him more tissues, water, decongestant, and blankets. But otherwise, she tried to leave him alone and spent the days working on some new sketches. She found it hard to concentrate, however, since she was so worried about Tom and his low temperature. She had done all she could to keep him warm, so she prayed Tom would return to good health. Upon awakening after a short catnap in the rocking chair, Daphne saw the fire was dying down, so she walked over to light it. Only then did she realize Tom's 2 suitcases were still lying on the floor from when he toppled in from the blizzard. Hadn't he only taken 1 suitcase to the funeral? Daphne shrugged as she began lugging the heavy things to the laundry room. As Daphne carefully began piling clothes into the washing machine, she discovered most of the clothes were for a girl. Did Tom bring back all of these things for me? Daphne stared at a deep green fleece sweater in confusion before dropping it in. Underneath all the strange clothing was a tiny purple plastic bag. Curious, Daphne peeked inside. An entire collection of makeup. Daphne gasped. "Is this also for me?" Of course she knew Tom was probably just trying to be nice, but it was still outright humiliating her poor skin was so apparent that a man would think of this. She sighed heavily as she slammed the door to the washing machine and twisted the dial to the cold cycle. She could do nothing about it, and she wouldn't let Tom know it bothered her so much. She wasn't going to wear the makeup. His stomach woke him first. Tom couldn't remember the last time he had felt so hungry, but he also didn't want to move. He ached everywhere. His lips were dry and cracked, and his nose hurt from wiping it so much with tissues. The entire length of his throat burned with a stinging pain. Even though it was quiet in the cabin, Tom assumed Daphne was awake since he could see the light from the kitchen streaming into his room. He felt a little guilty she had sacrificed so much of her sleep to take care of him. She didn't even seem to mind. And yesterday, checking on him all the time, making sure the humidifier was still going, she was so caring, and he had barely lifted his head to say thank you. Then Tom thought of something his pa had said once. "A woman who sacrifices herself for you is a woman you better hold on to, son. And you better sacrifice for her, or you'll have no grip to keep her." This thought about Daphne was a little strange since he had no intentions of holding on to Daphne in the way his pa had meant. She was a great person, and while she was here, he would do all he could to pay her back for what she had done for him. One thing was certain, Daphne was special, and he was sure, regardless of anything else, they would be good friends. He put his hands behind his head and smiled at the ceiling. "Good morning," said Daphne from the doorway. "Good," he cleared his throat. "Good morning, Daphne. How are you?" "I'm all right. The real question is, how are you?" Tom smiled weakly. "I'm feeling better, thanks to you." Daphne walked over to the desk where the thermometer lay and quickly took Tom's temperature. She sighed in relief and gave Tom a big smile. "You're finally back to normal. I was praying for that." Tom smiled wider. "Praying I would no longer be weird?" He frowned at his bad joke, but Daphne obliged him by laughing a little. "You know what I meant. You were at 96 degrees all day yesterday. I was getting really anxious." "I was?" "Yes, I told you that yesterday morning, remember?" Tom shook his head. "I don't remember much of anything except that you took care of everything I needed." "I was happy to return the favor," Daphne said simply. Tom raised his eyebrows. "I guess you were cold and helpless not too long ago, too." "Yes," said Daphne. "So, are you hungry?" "I'm starving, actually," Tom admitted. "Great, I'm on it," she said with a grin, and spun around to the kitchen. Just a few minutes later, Daphne came back with a plate of dried peaches and a bowl of hot oatmeal. A cookie sheet posed as a bed tray. She patiently held it in her hands as Tom had another coughing fit. When he finally finished, she placed it on his lap. "How did you know I like raisins in my oatmeal?" Tom croaked. "I guessed." Tom took a bite. He could feel its trail of warmth all the way down to his stomach. "Thanks, Daphne," Tom croaked again. "It's been a long time since I've had breakfast in bed." Suddenly Daphne looked uncomfortable. "Tom, does your fiancé know you are here alone with me?" Tom felt a shock rush through him. "How did you know I was engaged?" Daphne blanched. "Well, I looked through some of your photo albums." "Oh, I thought I had gotten rid of all the pictures of her." Tom scratched his head. A confused look crossed Daphne's face. "We're not engaged anymore." "Oh, I'm so sorry. When did that happen?" Daphne asked hesitantly. "Last spring," Tom declared. "Oh," Daphne breathed. I'm sorry." Tom shrugged. "It's okay. I saw her at the funeral," he confided, folding his arms. "She has a new boyfriend now." Daphne sat down on his bed below his feet with a sympathetic look on her face. "I would like to change the subject, though," Tom said with a small smile. Daphne nodded, understanding. "Tell me why you came back so early. I wasn't expecting you for at least another week." "The weather forecast changed. There was a lull in the storm, or at least there was when I started out. If I had waited until next week, another blizzard would be on its way, and would have made it impossible for me to come back for another month. I didn't want you to think I wasn't coming back. Plus, I would hate to waste all that hunting time." "So you risked your life?" Daphne was shocked. Tom swallowed and cringed with the pain of it. "I would have been fine, but there was a road blocked off. I had to take a detour, and my snowmobile got stuck. I really don't know how it happened since I know the mountain so well. Just trying to be careful. I guess I was distracted. Anyway, I had to walk the rest of the way." "You walked?" exclaimed Daphne in the same shocked tone. Tom finished chewing his peaches before he spoke again. "It was only a couple of miles, but even with my snowshoes it took me forever, with the wind blowing against me." Daphne sighed heavily. "Well, I'm glad you're okay," she finally said. "I'll let you be now. Call me if you need anything. When you're feeling good enough, I have something to show you. 2 things, actually." "What is it?" asked Tom, instantly curious. "A surprise," said Daphne with a smile. Just tell me," Tom insisted. Daphne laughed. "Not a chance. Just eat your breakfast. I'm going to go take a shower," she said as she spun around toward the door. "Oh, hey, that reminds me," said Tom, his mouth still full. Daphne turned to face him again and waited while he finished chewing. "I brought you some clothes and things. They're in my suitcase," he said, his mouth empty now. Daphne hesitated a moment. "Yeah, I saw them when I went to wash your clothes." You did that for me? Thanks," Tom interjected, stuffing his mouth again. "Sure," said Daphne. "All those things are for me?" Tom swallowed as he nodded. "What other girl is there in this cabin? That certainly won't fit me," he said with a grin. Daphne smiled shyly. "You didn't have to do that, Tom." "Yes, I did. You don't have anything else." "How much did you spend?" she inquired. Tom shook his head. It doesn't matter. Daphne gave him a pleading look. Please, Tom, just tell me. It had to have been at least $300. That makeup alone was probably close to $60. Am I right? Tom shrugged. I don't remember, Daphne. My sister is the one who picked everything out. She has classy taste, Daphne noted. Tom nodded in agreement. Look, don't feel like you have to wear anything. Tom stopped and scratched his head as he felt his cheeks turn ruddy. Oh, good night. What I mean is, don't feel obligated to wear anything I got you because I don't know what you like. Tom grimaced. He totally botched that one. Okay, well, I appreciate it, Tom, Daphne declared. You're very thoughtful and generous, too. More so than I could ever imagine. Tom rolled his eyes. What's with the eye rolling? Daphne questioned. Tom smiled as he dropped a peach in his mouth. You're just so gracious with compliments, Daphne. Don't know that I deserve them. You absolutely do, Daphne countered. Why don't you stay and talk to me for a minute? Tom suggested. Your shower can wait. Daphne stared at him with a blank look. He actually wanted her company? Come on, Tom persisted. Pull up the chair there. Almost mechanically, Daphne obeyed and sat in the desk chair beside the bed. Tom probably did need to talk as he was still grieving over his father. How are you, Tom? How's your family doing? Daphne asked sincerely. Tom looked directly at her as he spoke. As good as can be expected, he replied. I want to talk about you. Tell me a story about you. What would you like to know? Daphne wondered. Start from the beginning. Where did you grow up? Tom asked. Stonebrook. It's about an hour south of the university. And you're a sophomore now? Tom wondered. A junior, corrected Daphne. How is college going for you? Daphne took a deep breath. It's okay, she muttered. Tom gave her a speculative look. Does that mean it isn't going well? No, it's fine, but on holiday weekends my roommates always go home, and I'm stuck by myself because I don't have a home to go to. Since I was the only one in the world on campus over winter break last year, I didn't find it much fun. Daphne tried to keep the frown off her face, but didn't succeed. Didn't your parents have a home before they went to Afghanistan? Tom wondered. Daphne smiled sadly. Yes, but they sold it before they left. They figured I'd be living in the dorms during the school year and with my grandmother in the summer. She lives only a half an hour away from Brocksville. Tom had finished his breakfast and set his dishes on the stool by the bed. Well, that's one thing I can relate to. What, rooming with your grandma? Daphne said wryly. No, being alone. It's terrible, isn't it? Tom pointed out. Daphne shrugged. Not always, but sometimes it is. Tom nodded. Did you know that the night I found you outside, I literally wondered if I was going crazy? A slow smile crept on Daphne's face. Why? Because you actually saw another person? That was part of it, but mostly I was sure I was hearing things. Was that you yelling? Daphne nodded. Yes, it definitely was me. I was desperate to find some help. Tom smiled with understanding. I was elated when I saw you outside your cabin, but when you found me, I was suddenly terrified you were mean or loopy or crazy or something. Well, it is kind of crazy to help a complete stranger, Tom said with a smile, leaning back on his pillows. Daphne's heart leaped at the sight of his perfect grin. She smiled back shyly. Well, I'm glad you did. Me too, Daphne. It would be a shame to not have met you. His sincerity was melting Daphne's heart. She tried to wrap a shell around her soul, knowing Tom didn't mean the compliment in the same way she wanted to take it. Daphne cleared her throat. I'm happy to have met you too, Tom, she said. I've been thinking about how remarkable everything has been. Tom cocked his head to one side. What do you mean? Well, you would have headed home to your father's funeral much sooner if the internet hadn't been down, and you received that message from your mom when she sent it. Am I right? Tom nodded. Yes, I would have. Well, if that hadn't have happened, you wouldn't have found me, and I might not have survived out there. Tom grew thoughtful and slowly nodded his head. And I still would have come back when I did to get more hunting done, even if you hadn't been here. And I probably wouldn't have recovered from whatever that was. Daphne grinned. I hadn't thought of that. It looks like we were both in the right place at the right time. Who knew it would be in a cabin in the middle of nowhere? Tom chuckled. Who knew? For a moment, all Daphne could do was just gawk at Tom's brilliant face. She was shocked to see he was staring back at her. She didn't quite know what to make of it. In a moment of utter chagrin, Tom realized he was staring at Daphne like an idiot. He cleared his throat. So, are you ever going to show me that surprise of yours, or are you going to make a man suffer and wonder for the rest of the day? Daphne grinned. I would love to show you, but it's in the other room. Are you up for a walk? Tom noticed his headache was gone. I think so, he said, moving his legs from under the covers and climbing out of his bed. The moment he got to his feet, a sudden head rush ran through him. Whoa, he muttered, bringing a hand to his head. Daphne caught his elbow before he could topple over. Can you walk? She questioned. Yes. What about you? Is your leg better? Tom wondered. Sure, Daphne said, leading him out of the room. It still hurts a bit, but I can get around without the crutches now. I appreciate you letting me borrow them. Tom shook his head. I wish everyone in the world were as grateful as you are, Daphne. I wish everyone in the world was as giving as you are. Daphne smiled as she returned the compliment. She led him to the couch in front of the big screen TV and flipped on the lights. You found a movie you like? Tom assumed. Yes, said Daphne. I hope you do too. I have seen every movie I own about 1 billion times, you know. What else is a lone man going to do when he can't get out of his old bunker? Daphne cracked a grin. Stare at a movie screen, I guess. Tom chuckled. Or a computer screen or a phone screen. We humans have awful habits of staring at all kinds of screens. Daphne laughed at that, and the two sat down next to each other on the sofa. Tom looked curiously at the menu on the screen for a movie he didn't recognize. A picture of his Pa was to the left, and 2 menu options read, My Life with Pa and Music Playlist. What is this? Tom asked, confused. Just watch, Daphne said as she clicked the first option. Some music started playing, and Tom saw his Pa holding a baby with dark reddish hair, whom he knew was himself. As the song went on, different pictures of Tom's childhood flashed on the screen. He watched himself grow up, his red hair getting redder and brighter the older he got. He saw pictures of his Pa helping him walk, his Pa throwing a baseball with him, his Pa teaching him how to ride a bike and to read a book. He saw pictures of himself and his Pa fishing, boating, sawing, building, and hiking. Daphne had picked songs that went along exactly with the pictures, songs that were his favorite. 20 minutes later, when the movie was over, Tom couldn't take his eyes off the last image of him and his Pa sitting on the porch swing, at home with both of their faces lit up with laughter. He felt as if his Pa were in the room with him, or at least the memory of him was so strong it was almost tangible. He blinked rapidly to keep the moisture in his eyes. Daphne pointed the remote to the TV and it clicked off. Tom didn't know what to say or to do. Did you like it? She whispered. Tom turned to face Daphne. Her big eyes were peering at him with intense curiosity. How could a near stranger come up with something so remarkable and personal? He nodded slowly and very softly added, I can't think of a better gift. Thank you, Daphne. You're welcome, she said simply. I didn't know you were so skilled, he added casually. That was very well done. Thank you. She handed him one of his sketchbooks. Is there something in here you want me to see? He asked. Daphne nodded, looking a little shy. Tom opened the sketchbook to the first page. Instantly his mouth dropped, and for a moment he merely gasped. The drawing was in pencil and with a very exact artistic hand. His Pa had his arm around him in a friendly gesture. His eyes seemed to glow the same way Tom remembered them, and he had the same subtle smile. What surprised him the most was the look on his own face. It did look like him, but the replica made Tom appear a lot happier than he felt. Do you like it? Daphne asked again, but this time there was doubt in her voice. Oh, yes, of course I do, Tom exclaimed, giving her a reassuring smile. I just can't believe how good it is. Tom shifted his gaze back to the drawing. It's incredible. He continued to stare at the picture in awe. You're very talented, Daphne, he said, looking back up at her. Very thoughtful. Daphne blushed at his praise. Well, you're welcome, she replied. Tom stood on his feet. I think we need to hang this up. I'll be right back, he said with a grin. He hurried to his room and dug through the bottom drawer of his desk. Yep, the picture frame was still there. After he dusted it off a bit with his fingers, he grabbed a small hammer and nail out of the top drawer and rushed back to Daphne. She was standing up now. How about right there? She asked, pointing to a spot next to the front door. My thoughts exactly, Tom agreed. He slid the perfect drawing behind the glass of the frame, quickly hammered a nail into the wall, and hung up the picture. There! It's perfect! He exclaimed as he turned toward Daphne again. He paused as he looked at her friendly face that appeared elated at the moment. This is exactly what I needed, he said more solemnly now. Then he took her in his arms and squeezed her tightly. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you so much. And that concludes Chapter 6. I hope you liked it. Hope you can see how they're coming together. Next week will be Chapter 7, Snake Charmer, as well as Chapter 8, Flying Blind, and perhaps even Chapter 9, which is called Brewing Desires. The reason I'm going to put all three of them together next week is because they're all very short chapters. So, I hope to see you next time for the next 3 chapters. If you want to find out more about Brenda's books, you can visit brendasbooks.net. Until next time, take care.